provide recording, and also we'll be uploading this recording to our website, edmondsclimate.com, after the meeting tonight, so people can also see and experience the workshop if they're unable to attend tonight as well. If you want to go to the first slide, Signy. So I know people are probably really familiar with Zoom by now, but in case you aren't, I just wanted to review some of the things and Zoom functionalities that hopefully will help make today's meeting run fairly smoothly for you. So first of all, you can rename yourself if you want. So if you're on your computer, you can hover over your name, click on participants, then hover over your name, and then you can rename yourself. If you're, and that's if you're on your computer to connect to Zoom. And I know we have a few people calling in tonight as well. If you're also on your computer, you can use the hand raise function. And so tonight we're going to have some interaction and some breakout groups. So if you want to speak, you can raise your hand. And so to do so, again, click on participants and the raise hand function. You can also access it via the chat box. So if you have that open, you can select the chat button at the bottom of your screen. For folks who have headsets, I know in these Zoom meetings, sometimes when you have a headset, it can decrease some of the ambient noise, and that applies to both whether you're calling in on your phone or calling in via a computer. And also tonight, right now we have 41 participants tonight, and people are still coming into the room. And so knowing this is a lot of people, encouraging people to keep themselves on mute when you're not speaking tonight. That would just hopefully, again, decrease some of the ambient noise as well. If you can go to the next slide, Signy. So I wanted to take a moment to go over the outline for today's workshop. But before we do that, I just want to do a quick round of introductions. And so I know we have a lot of people tonight. So if you're on your computer and you have access to the chat function, you can open your chat, and it'd be great if you could introduce yourself, one, with your name, and two, just a icebreaker question of what is one thing you like to do in the springtime? Now, especially knowing we are 4 days officially into spring. So your name and what is one thing you like to do in the springtime. So I'll give about 30 seconds to a minute for people to share and introduce themselves in the chat. Great, so we have people who like to plant trees, garden, weeding in their gardening, lots of gardening, which is great. Riding my bike, nature walks, liking to walk on the beach, playing soccer, going for runs, spring skiing, walking in the warm rain. Great. Running and biking, food gardening, enjoy walking through the parks and down by the ocean, walking outdoors. Great. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. I also wanted to provide kind of also an overview of tonight's agenda. So we're about to go just introduce at least the project team for this as well. And then Mark Johnson from ESA will go over some of the background information for the Climate Action Plan, including some proposed Climate Action Plan strategies. And then we're going to have the bulk of tonight's meeting, participating in breakout group discussions. And this is really the opportunity for us to hear from you on your perspectives, your feedback, your priorities for the Climate Action Plan and its strategies. And then finally, we're going to end with a report out from the facilitators of each of these groups, so we can all hear what each others are saying as well. So one thing I do want to tee up for this breakout room group discussion is that everyone tonight will have an opportunity to provide input on both some of the existing strategies that Mark will cover, as well as identifying any new strategies that you want to see included in this climate action plan. So since everyone's going to have an opportunity, and we have about 40 participants on tonight's call, we want to make sure that the breakout rooms are about evenly split, and you're also participating in a group that you care a lot about. So if you are on your computer and you can open your chat, we're going to have you choose two options. So option one, you can either comment on strategies related to buildings and energy and waste and natural resources. And option two is commenting on strategies related to transportation. And so if you can identify, I just put both of those options in the chat. If you can identify which option you want to participate in, we'll make those breakout groups so you can participate in those breakout groups. We recognize that since we're doing online, not everyone is going to have the opportunity to participate in all of the breakout groups related to existing proposed strategies. However, after the end of the workshop, we'll be releasing a public survey, so you can provide your input on those strategies then as well. I also wanted to flag, if you're calling in via the phone, what we will do is when we push people into breakout rooms, Alyssa, she will be our main host tonight. She will stay behind and she'll kind of check in with each person calling in on the phone to see what your breakout room preference is, and then Alyssa will assign you to one of those breakout rooms. Great. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Kernan to introduce the project team. So thank you all.
Working on unmute myself. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kernan Lane. I'm with the City of Edmonds Planning Division. From the city working on this, along with myself, Shane Hope, the Director of Development Services, and Rob Chade, the Planning Manager. I'd also like to recognize the Climate Protection Committee that wrote the last Climate Action Plan in 2010 on this. We're updating that. And there's a number of members here tonight as well from the Climate Protection Committee. Project consultants on this, Mark Johnson from ESA. We started some climate planning in 2018 on this. So the City Council passed a resolution that began the latest round of climate planning on this. And Mark's been with us since that time. The intent was to begin the Climate Action Plan in 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020 and a lot of plans went out the window on that. So we're picking it up this year on this. Also, Cascadia has been brought on board to help with the public engagement during the Climate Action Plan update. Mike Chang, you met already, who introduced everybody. Lisa Rodriguez will be making things running smoothly on the side. Signe Lindquist and Alejandro Paredes. I hope I didn't slaughter that too bad, sorry. So this here's the, what's the next slide? This is the, so I'll talk about this too. So this is our second meeting on the Climate Action Plan update. In February, we had an open house to bring everybody up to speed. It's been a while since we reached out to the community on this, and this was just to reach out, get some information, background on that. And tonight, we're really going to start digging down into the details on some of the strategies that have been proposed, and Mark will be digging into that. Looking at the names of everybody here, I see some different names than people that were here at the open house. So we did send a postcard out to the entire city. Hopefully that reached more people, and that's why we're seeing more and different names here tonight. Hey, you want to talk more about the outreach, Mike?
Yeah, so so we're here where the star is currently the outreach. So tonight is kind of one of our first touch points. Then we'll have a public survey. And then kind of in the interim between now through August, we'll be doing outreach with various organizations and other partners to help also get their insight and input into the climate action plan. And then come the late summer, we'll have another opportunity for the community to reconvene to kind of see where the climate action plan is at, as well as another public survey opportunity. And this will tee us up kind of for completion of the climate action plan by the end of this calendar year. So thanks, Kernan. So I'm going to turn this over now to Mark to give background about the climate action plan and some of the proposed strategies.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for coming, everyone. I love seeing 40 some odd folks come out for this topic. I'm going to give you a little bit of framing around what we're looking at this evening and the input that we're trying to get from you. First of all, we did an inventory that looked at the greenhouse gases that are produced locally and include in that the greenhouse gases that are part of the imported electricity that's used in the community. We also did a kind of broad look at what the total greenhouse gas generated from the Edmonds community. And this diagram kind of gives you a sense of how those three things interrelate. But our main focus is on this, what we call the local inventory. If we could go to the next slide. So local emissions refers to those emissions that actually occur in Edmonds, together with the emissions that occur as a result of energy that's consumed in Edmonds. It doesn't include the greenhouse gases that are associated with making the goods that we buy that come from someplace else and bring into Edmonds. That's just stuff that's far enough outside of our control that we can't really do a great deal of planning at this scale. It's got to be taken care of in another way. So this is where we're focused. And as you can see from this pie chart, the emissions in 2017 that we were looking at, about 52% of it was from energy associated with buildings, and about 40% of it was related to transportation. And then there also are some components relating to waste and refrigerant loss. What this also shows is that there was about a 7.2 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per capita. So I just use a fancy term there, carbon dioxide equivalent. For those that haven't heard that before, very quickly, carbon dioxide is the most common of the greenhouse gases, but there are a number of other gases that cause global warming, and many of them are much more powerful warming agents than carbon dioxide. And that specifically, if you're looking at that refrigerant loss, that's a good example of that. And so in order to make them equivalent to each other for this type of inventory, those are converted into what's called a carbon dioxide equivalent. And we just use this metric ton measure because it's sort of a right size measure. So 7.2 metric tons per capita, that's about 17 tons per household in Edmonds. Next slide, please. We also went and looked at city documents to look at what the planning and policy of the city was that pertained to climate action. There are about 300 measures in all the planning documents that we looked at. Many of them overlap. Some of them are sort of loosely affiliated with climate action, but some of them are very directly affect the greenhouse gas emissions of the city. And what we wanted to look for were strategies that had that strong correlation and that would make a big difference and that were trackable over time so that we could be reporting on them on an ongoing basis and not have to wait for 7 years in order to be able to get around to doing another inventory as we did, because that's a much more intensive effort. We built this tool for estimating the results, and we developed some preliminary goals for each of those strategies. I'm just going to flash up here the list of the strategies. The next slide, please. So this is what those strategies look like, and I'm going to go into those a little bit more in detail this evening. So if we go on to one more here, what we did with these strategies is we put them in a timeline to see how they would help us in reaching the target. So on this graph, this diagonal green line that you see going from 2017 to 2050 is the target that we have for getting to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And that was established by doing a science-based, choosing a science-based target of 1.5 degrees Celsius in climate warming, and this is what it translates to, is that we have to get to this net zero by 2050. The orange line that you see at the top is what we call a business as usual forecast, and that's just taking the 2017 forecast that we have and adding the population and the employment that we're expecting to get a number for the future. This is where we would be in the future if we did nothing and everybody just kept doing things just the way that they've been doing in 2017. But fortunately, there will be some changes as a result of federal and state regulation in particular. And that's where we get this, what we call the adjusted business as usual forecast, which is that light blue line that's just below. The adjusted business as usual forecast goes down fairly steeply towards 2030 because the state has instituted a clean energy legislation that will get our electricity to be carbon neutral by 2030, and it will have zero carbon by 2050. In addition, automobile standards get increasingly stringent going out to the future, and so those also tend to bring down the emissions. And so even after that point in 2030, when we're carbon neutral, you see the line still continues to go down mainly because of automobiles becoming more efficient. These areas that you see in between there's some purple bars that you see, and there's a little gold and green on those. That represents the effect of these strategies that I'm going to talk about. And as you can see, there's a gap, and it's this gap in here that we're trying to close by adding more strategies or going more aggressively at the strategies that we've identified. So if we could go to the next slide, I'm going to walk through these slides. It looks like I'm getting a little tap here to see if we want to break for a moment and introduce the mayor. Did you want to stop and say something there, Mike? No. Okay, we're just going to keep going. The mayor joined us. Thank you for joining us, Mayor. So I'm going to talk about these individual strategies and what goes into them very briefly. So in the building and energy area, we have three primary strategies that we were looking at. The first one has to do with replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources. And if you have your all strategies handout, you can follow along with some of the numbers that I'm going to be throwing out. That you don't need to take a zillion notes because we've already got those notes taken for you, and that's your reference. But just to kind of explain some of these things, the first strategy was looking at solar installations. And in 2018, there were 164 solar installations in the city. Our target by 2050 was to get that up to 1,200. Now, one of the kind of surprising things about having this clean energy legislation is that that's going to clean up our electric grid completely by 2030. And so a sort of surprising thing about that is that makes this particular strategy really not add much in terms of getting more green energy, except in the very near term until 2030. So getting solar installations between now and 2030 helps the utilities reach their goal, but beyond 2030, they have to be there anyway. And so we don't get a lot of benefit going out in the future from that. It's a bit of a surprise. So we really actually get a zero benefit. But we do get a benefit from having solar installations, like I say. It helps utilities, and it also provides a degree of local resilience. So there's another benefit to it. Moving on to the next one, we have the energy efficiency of improving efficiency of existing buildings. And here, what we're talking about is retrofits of existing buildings. Again, because of the improvements in, or the changes that the Clean Energy Bill does for us, electricity becomes carbon neutral. Just, you know, as long as we're using electricity, it will be carbon neutral. So the real savings that occurs in this category comes from either more efficient gas appliances, or other fossil fuel appliances, or replacing them with electric devices. So for 2050, we were looking at getting 33% of the residential and commercial square footage of the city upgraded. That represents basically 1% a year from going forward from 2017. And if we achieve that, that would come to about 6,200 metric tons a year of greenhouse gas emissions savings. In addition to that, this particular metric, we included the wastewater treatment plant improvements that were made. They were made after 2017 when the last inventory was done, and they were estimated to save about a little over 400 metric tons. And next slide, please. Oh, excuse me, I went too fast. I'm sorry, could you go back one? The new buildings. So the efficiency of new buildings, this is obviously related to the new mixed-use buildings, the new apartment buildings, the new commercial buildings that you see going up. And what this was about, getting more of those buildings to be LEED certified or equivalent in their energy efficiency. Now, the assumptions in our tool are that the electric and gas appliance mix would be roughly the same as at present, which is roughly split 50-50 between electric and gas appliances. So that might change in the future, but that just tells you that our estimate, if anything, would be conservative. Our target was to get, by 2050, 75% of new residential development and 100% of commercial development to be LEED, at least be silver LEED certified by 2050. And that would result in just a little over 3,000 metric tons a year of energy savings. one of the things that I wanted to sort of put in the framing with regard to this is that the rate of buildings, new buildings being built, although sometimes it feels like there are new buildings popping up all over the place, it is actually, new buildings are a relatively small component, and even by 2050, a sort of back of the envelope estimate is that the buildings built after 2017 would comprise about 20% of the residential floor area in the city and about 9% of the non-residential floor area. So change comes slowly in buildings, and most of the buildings in 2050 by a long shot will be buildings that are already standing now. So you can see how important the existing building factor is. Okay, now if we could go on to the next one. So we also are looking at waste and natural resource solutions. And one of those is to reduce waste and material consumption. And what we were looking at there was specifically about solid waste. So in 2017, the waste generated per person was about 770 pounds of solid waste. And in Edmonds, it's estimated that about 73% of the emissions from waste come from solid waste. So some of them do come from wastewater and from other sources, but the great majority of it is solid waste. And this is the stuff that gets hauled to the landfill and actually generates, a lot of it generates methane, which is another greenhouse gas, and that's a thing that we would like to reduce. So by 2050, we were targeting 50% reduction in solid waste, and that would have a result of about 2,200 metric tons of savings. Then the other thing that we can do is carbon sequestration, and there was a very concerned populace in the city about keeping the trees that are there and to increase the urban canopy, urban tree canopy, and as a means of carbon sequestration. And so we included that. Now, this one doesn't have as much as you might have thought, and that just simply has to do with, it's a matter of scale and how much room there is for more trees. But we set a target of 10,000 additional trees in Edmonds by 2050, and that would give about 260 metric tons annually in carbon sequestration. So there is some benefit there. In order to really offset our 7 tons per person would take a whole lot of forest, and so there's only so much that can be done in an urban setting, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do what we can. Moving on to transportation, if we could go to the next slide, we have several strategies here. The first one is actually to do with land use, but it translates into fewer vehicle miles traveled. The idea is to develop land use patterns that are less reliant on getting in a vehicle to get your basic needs, and that is achieved by having the majority of future commercial and multifamily development occurring in centers where shopping and employment opportunities are close by. We had projected that by 2050, approximately 3,200 additional units, that's about 85% of all commercial and industrial development, would occur within those centers. And that would result in about 3,400 metric tons of of savings. Another way is to get folks onto transit. A lot of, about 25% of total vehicle miles traveled is from commuting. And so there's a lot of focus on that. Right in 2017, about 8.8% of commuters in Edmonds used transit. The target that we set was to get that to 30% by 2050. And if that were achieved, it would have a savings of about 4,400 metric tons per year. In the area of what's called active transportation, this is walking and biking, we again were looking at the commute component of that, and we in 2017, about 2.4% were biking or walking to work. The target that we set was that 12% of commuters would be walking or biking to work by 2050, and that would result in about 2,000 metric tons of savings. Going to carpooling and vehicle sharing, we were looking at the fact that about 9.3% of Edmonds folks were carpooling in 2017. And we projected moving that up by 2050 to 25%. We also included in this metric the idea of reducing the amount of vehicle miles traveled for commuting by increasing access to alternative work weeks. And that includes like working at home, which a lot of us did a lot of in this last year. So if we got to that 25% of commuters carpooling and 6% of folks being able to, or a 6% reduction of the commute by utilizing an alternate work week, we could save 4,500 metric tons per year. Now, that 6% reduction in that reducing with regard to the alternate work week and the working at home, I ran across an interesting statistic having to do with the pandemic. This was a study that was done last summer in August, and it was looking at what the work at home rate was nationally, so it's not just in Edmonds, but it gives a picture, and it was very interesting to see that there's actually a racial disparity, but as we've seen in a lot of things to do with the pandemic, but 26% of white employees were working from home, 19% of Hispanic workers, and 9.5% of Black workers were working at home. And what that tells us is, well, first of all, that we have some disparities, but it also tells us that getting a 6% reduction in a commute by alternate work weeks is probably a lot more achievable than any of us would have thought a couple of years ago. I think a lot of employers have had their eyes opened with this pandemic, and we may see some changes that happen just as a result of having seen that. And then finally, get to electric vehicles, and this is the big bang for your buck change here. There are currently around 37,000 vehicles in Edmonds. And in December of 2017, about 370 of those were electric vehicles, meaning battery or plug-in vehicles. By December of 2020, the number had doubled, so about 760. And of course, it needs to double and double again. We were looking at, by 2050, having 15,000, or roughly 33% of what would be the fleet of vehicles in Edmonds by that time. that would be converted to electric. And that is a relatively conservative number compared to what a lot of the industry is looking at. But it is something to keep in mind that cars last a long time. So there will still be cars on the road that were purchased in 2035 that in 2050, there will still be a fair number of cars that were purchased in 2035 operating. And but if we got to that 15,000, that 33% of the city's vehicles, it would amount to 24,000 metric tons of savings. So that's kind of a whirlwind look at the strategies that we have included in this estimating tool. There are other strategies out there, and we know that a lot of you have ideas about that, and we're looking forward to your input on both how we can improve these strategies as well as the other strategies that we can use.
Great. Thank you, Mark, for that overview. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. And so I want to encourage people, if you have any questions, you can either type them in the chat, or if you're calling on the phone, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. So we have one question from Arnold in the chat already, asking, is there any information about how many people who live in Edmonds who also work in Edmonds? And I'll see if Mark or others know.
The variability alone, we have.
Okay, so we do have that kind of data available through the community survey that the census does. I don't have the numbers on the off the top of my head, but it is a number that is available. If there's a goal or strategy in there, it is probably something that we could keep good track of.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one of us can look for the census links and data, and we can place them in the chat. I think Mark Ehlers, I know you unmuted yourself. It seemed like to ask a question.
Oh, so. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't know it was yeah,
no.
Thank you. How can you claim solar is a viable option when, first of all, we have the cloudiest climate in the country, the variability, you get the capacity factor alone. I mean, you must know the capacity factor of a solar panel in December when you have your peak power production is what, 2%, 3%? And it's so unreliable that, and it's the most expensive. That's the thing. I mean, you're talking about, it's nice virtue signaling, but you can't run a society in unreliable power like that. I mean, where's your engineering data? Well, where's the engineering data showing what you're going to do? Because it's very variable. And I mean, I've looked at data from all other countries. I can just go to the German websites and I can tell you what happens there.
Well, as I did say, also because our grid is expected to be carbon neutral by 2030, as required by the state, installing solar is not a big factor in the local community being able to meet these carbon reduction goals. So solar efficiency aside, it's also not the sort of most effective way for getting to reduce carbon. That said, there are cloudier climates than ours that have vast amounts of solar energy being generated. And
well, but they don't produce it when you need it. They produce. Germany has a capacity factor of 16% or 15% over, or 11% over the entire country. That's 1/3 of what they have for a plant that you put in the Southwest. I mean, it's the cost. The cost is huge, and the benefit is minimum. That's the thing.
Yeah. So Point taken.
Okay, the point I got to make is you got to be cost effective if we're going to decarbonize and not do virtue signaling things that sound good, but don't actually replace carbon production into the environment.
Great, thank you, Mark. We'll do one more question, but I do want to flag that in a minute we'll be going into breakout rooms, and this is really kind of the opportunity to have more of these types of discussions as well, and each of the facilitators will be taking these notes. So I do see there's a few other questions related to solar, but I'm going to go to one question about solid waste from Sandra. How can solid waste be reduced other than more recycling?
So a big part of it is diverting organics. So if you consider that to be a recycling component, then of course, but getting the organics out of the waste stream helps, because it also, those are a lot of what's contributing to the methane production in landfills. And then the other is just to reduce the use of disposable things that you have, so people can actually just cut down on the things that they use once and throw away. So those are other ways beside recycling.
Great. So with that, we're about to go into our breakout rooms, and I see additional comments and questions in the chat. Please feel free to continue using the chat to identify those questions, and we can hopefully address them either tonight in our breakout rooms, or later on as well. It seems like there are a lot of questions and a lot of interest in this. So with this, right now, we're about to transition into our breakout room discussions. And so just giving people a sense of how this will work tonight is that we're going to have, so earlier we asked whether you wanted to participate in either buildings, energy, waste, and natural resources breakout groups, as well as, or the transportation breakout group. We also said everyone tonight will have the opportunity to comment on some of the proposed existing strategies, as well as identifying what are some of the new strategies that will be needed to reduce the gap, kind of what we talked about. You'll have about 25 minutes in each of your breakout groups, and then what will happen is the facilitators of each of the breakout groups will swap breakout groups. We acknowledge that we are doing everything virtually and remotely right now. And so we're trying to identify the ways to minimize moving the number of people to be moving rooms. And so what that actually means in practice, if you can go to the next slide, Signy, is that in the first 25 minutes, you'll be in your breakout room. People who are assigned to breakout room number 1 will be with Mark, talking about buildings and energy and waste and natural resources. And then for the second 25 minutes, we'll be talking with Signy on identifying new strategies. Similarly, if you're in breakout room number 3, the first 25 minutes, you'll be talking with Signy on new strategies. And the second 25 minutes, you'll be talking about existing strategies related to buildings and energy and waste and natural resources with Mark. So hopefully this gives you a sense of kind of the opportunities and the diversity of discussions you'll be having over the next hour and some change. I also wanted to identify that if you are calling in from your phone, you can also access all of the handouts from tonight's workshop on our website. And so I'm going to say the website, you can access that if you have some pen and paper. So I'll wait about 10, 15 seconds if you wanted to grab something. The website, you can access all of our handout materials for tonight. It is Edmonds Climate, all one word, .com /project-materials. So Edmonds Climate, EDMONDS CLIMATE.com/project PROJECT -materials MATERIALS. So those will be the handout materials that each of the facilitators will be sharing their screen and following along. So if you're calling in on your phone, you can be following along that way. I also wanted to flag that if you haven't identified a breakout room and you're calling in via the computer, we have just kind of made some decisions just to make sure there's kind of equal numbers in each breakout rooms. And if you're calling in via the phone, if you can take a moment to stay behind, and Alyssa will check in with you and putting you into a breakout room. And she'll do that via the phone. So if you want to unmute yourself. I also wanted to flag, it seems Tim Payne moved to transportation breakout group. So I'll give a moment and second pause just to make sure Alyssa is ready. And Alyssa will be our main host tonight. So if you have any issues related to tech as well, you can text Alyssa at 206-429-5270 to troubleshoot any of your tech issues. So again, I'll say that again slowly. If you have any tech issues, you can text or call Alyssa at 206-429-5270. So with that, I'll just check in with Alyssa real quick to see if you're ready to put people in their breakout rooms.
Yes, I'm going to open the rooms now, so hopefully you all can go and I'll hang out here.
Great, thank you all.
Mike, since you're the host, I couldn't assign you to 2.
Okay,
but that's your room.
That's my room. Okay, great.
Hello, people on the phone. Does anybody have a preference for a group that they would like to be in?
Yes, me. I'd like to be in transportation. Peter.
And your phone number ends in 9031?
9031, yes.
Great. I will move you to transportation. And how about the phone number ending in 9768?
I'd like to be in building and energy.
Okay, great. I'll move you over. And last but not least, phone number ending in 5033. You're on mute if you are speaking. Yes, I think everyone's back.
Great. So the next part, just since I think we had 4 different breakout rooms happening, and so kind of what I want to invite each of the facilitators to kind of quickly, in about a minute each, to give an overview of some of the key takeaways within your breakout rooms. And so with that, maybe I can go first, and since I'm already speaking, and then we can, I can call on some of the other facilitators to share. So I was leading kind of the input into existing transportation strategies. And I think overall, there was really broad support for all 5 of the existing transportation strategies. I think some of the highlights we were talking about is ensuring that we're thinking about how to fund things. So whether it's incentives, subsidies, or tax penalties, and kind of what are the levers associated with each of these strategies. We should also, and related to some things, I think a lot of the strategies we're thinking about what happens with new things, right? New development, new transit systems. But there's also making sure that we're also considering things that already exist. So existing development, existing infrastructure that we can also kind of bring along in terms of achieving some of the goals we've identified. I think in addition, kind of equity and accessibility kind of went along all of them. So when we're thinking about active transportation, such as e-bikes or public transportation, making sure that we consider equity, kind of who's using them, thinking specifically about elderly people, people with disabilities, parents with small children. How can we ensure that these options are also accessible for all who live in Edmonds as well? So I think those were some of the highlights from the transportation group. So maybe I will hand this to Alejandro, just because you're next on my screen, to see if you wanted to give a quick 1 to 2 minute overview of some of the key themes from your group.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, I think in my groups, we talked about new strategies. So strategies that are not included in the plan right now, but potentially could be considered. I think both conversations were great. Some of the themes that kind of came about is, one thing was a little bit, I think on both groups to start with, there was a clarification of what electrifying your household meant, right? Is it just like, don't we all have electricity potentially, right? But it's looking at it more holistically through every aspect of a household that uses energy power. One thing that also the group talked about was, consider bicycles. How can we make that more possible within the city of Edmonds, the routes, make it more safe, make it more accessible. Also considering e-bikes and how that actually can be used for commuting as well. And the equity part was also brought up, right? I think a lot of the solutions can be great, but how can we make it equitable and affordable to the entire population? Other things that came up, I think, were, let me see, talking about, how do we consider solutions that are potentially longer to implement compared to solutions that are more short term, and what are the impacts between, those two things. And, for the city to consider that, because potentially some of our smaller near-term solutions could have value and have an impact. We talked about also, there was a lot of talk about electrification beyond just, vehicles, but also looking into like buses. Edmonds has its own transit system, so looking into that and how that could be expanded as well. We talked about trees on both sessions as well, and also just kind of natural spaces and parks. Edmonds potentially not having as many parks, so how can we retain what Edmonds already has, and also expand on that, and expand also on trees. And so I think those are some of the themes within my conversation.
Okay. Thanks, Alejandro. Seems like you covered a lot, so thank you for sharing. Mark, so you're next on my screen, so if I want to do a quick 1 to 2 minute report out on key themes from your breakout group discussion.
Here. Well, I had some very lively discussions with folks and really appreciated all of the input. Like others, I heard the equity theme quite consistently with folks, that the concern that if there's going to be programs that either impose regulations that are costly or some other costs that come in, that there's a look at how that's going to affect the people who least can afford to make these these kinds of changes. And you know, whether that's some programs that are needed to provide either incentives or assistance. There was kind of a lot of enthusiasm around the idea of having a kind of a revolving loan program that could help folks with existing buildings in particular, recognizing that that folks who are in new homes often are better off to begin with, but folks who are in older homes often aren't, and they're also dealing with having to you know, remove something as well as put something in. So you have kind of higher cost barriers to overcome. So there was a lot of focus on that. There's also a theme around just what is the, you know, that wanting some guidance on what's the best place to put resources, things that actually do result in decarbonizing. And so the concern about solar, for example, not being something that gives as much bang for the buck as, say, heat pumps or weatherization do. So wanting the plan, what I heard was that, you know, wanting the plans and the strategies to take that into consideration as well. And thinking about, you know, creative ways to sort of put more than one goal together. So for example, when thinking about where those 10,000 trees are going to go, to focus on lower income areas in the community where there, you know, may not be as many resources for doing that kind of planting on their own. So trying to kind of get a double benefit out of some of these strategies that can help communities lift themselves up. And there was a little bit of discussion about some, you know, more detailed things around what works, on-demand hot water, and those, you know, different technologies like this. And I can just say we didn't get into a ton of detail there, but folks who are interested, very interested in ways in which they can get involved in, you know, things that they can do immediately that make sense. And I think a lot of emphasis on the need for educational resources, just to help people understand how to look at the problem and how to see what's the best thing for their particular home. So
thanks, Mark.
That's about it.
I'll jump in here. I know we have just a couple minutes and I'm the last one to share out. I talked about new strategies as well. And a major theme was talking about how we meet electricity demand if we're electrifying more things, and how do we pay for that? So that was a big topic of conversation. Folks liked ideas for requiring certain things of new buildings, and also talked about potential strategies that we might be able to help existing buildings retrofit to conserve electricity. We had some interest in focusing on schools, helping them electrify, as well as incentivizing electric vehicles, carpooling, and bike sharing programs. And then new ideas folks came up with included nuclear, storing energy in vehicles on a grid, working with geothermal, sustainable gardening, and water conservation. So I'll leave it at that. And thanks to both my groups for great discussion.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our facilitators. Thank you, Kernan, and all of you for taking 2 hours of your evening to be with us today. This is really helpful. I wanted to kind of give an overview of kind of like some of the next steps as well. And so next steps in this process is we'll be working with the city and with the ESA to be integrating a lot of the feedback and the comments that we heard today. We also have a public survey that is actually launching tonight. So y'all are the very first people to hear about it. And so we will have this public survey to get additional input from people across the community, as well as people who weren't able to attend tonight, on how can we continue, again, refining these existing proposed strategies, as well as, again, identifying new strategies so we can reduce that gap. In the meantime, as we begin refining the potential strategies we're considering for this climate action plan, we'll also be conducting outreach to various stakeholder groups as we get input for some of the proposed strategies as they're being developed. And so, and once we kind of do some of that engagement with various groups, organizations, and other agencies, this is going to culminate into kind of a revised set of strategies. And we're going to have another set of community workshops in the late summer, again, so we can have another touch base with folks, as well as another survey to get another round of input. The survey is in the chat. Again, y'all are the very first folks to kind of see that, and this is going to be promoted over the next several weeks as well. Additionally, hopefully you can always go to our website for the most up-to-date information, edmondsclimate.com. And you can also, if you haven't not yet, you can sign up for project newsletters by emailing climateaction@edmondswa.gov. So with that, thank you all again for attending this workshop tonight. It's great kind of seeing the drive and the passion from the community and all of the different types of perspectives. So I really appreciate everyone coming and providing their feedback tonight. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this.
Thank you, Mark, and everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fill out your surveys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, fill out the surveys. And I know, Arnold, you have a question here, knowing how many people are involved in this discussion. And so just recognizing we're going to have other more intentional outreach strategies to make sure we hear from kind of a representative sample of Edmonds as we move forward, just acknowledging that we have a lot of people who are really interested and passionate and want to contribute in this process. And we also know that there's more work that we can continue to bring in people into this conversation. So thanks for asking that, Arnold.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.